I'm concerned that they're going to say, hey, national emergency, turn in your silver. There's precedent for it. Franklin Roosevelt did it. There's a different reason for it this time. We're about to go to war. North Korea has sunk one of our ships in the Pacific. We don't have a silver stockpile. You got to turn in your silver. We need to have hoarders and speculators holding the country hostage, and we don't need them profiting from the country's misfortune. So we'll pay them a low rate, $2 an ounce, and they won't have to worry about paying capital gains tax. We'll excuse them for that. Now, I know I'm painting a real bleak picture, and it isn't what people want to hear.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. We're going to be talking about the Pilgrims, not the ones that you know of back in your history books, but another group. And we're going to be speaking with Charles Savoie, who's also going to be sharing some information with us on the Texas Bullion Depository. He's no stranger to the show, and it's an honor to speak with him today. He's of SilverStealers.net. He's the author of Silver Squelchers, and really it's a roadmap that exposes a group that controls silver. So Charles, thanks for coming on the show with me today.
I'm happy to be here, Ken.
Sir, the Pilgrims, in its original sense, were explorers, pioneers in search of freedom. And the Pilgrims that we're going to be discussing today seem to have a much more nefarious motive. And as you've pointed out in your research, so if you would, for anyone who doesn't know, please just share some information on who these people are and what do they do.
Well, Ken, actually, they do connect direct to the historical pilgrims that came from England in the early 1600s, and they formed Massachusetts Bay Colony, Plymouth Bay Colony, Connecticut Colony, et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, the Dutch came over and founded New Netherland, which is New York State, and New Amsterdam, which became renamed as New York City in 1664. The Dutch and the British had a conflict, but at some point in the late 1600s, they reached a concordat, and the Dutch and the British are actually partners in globalism today. And this group called the Pilgrims Society in London, founded in 1902, and the Pilgrims of the U.S., founded in 1903, is it's a transatlantic alliance of big, old-line, rich people, and it's sponsored by the British royal family. And from my look into this group, what I'm about to say might irritate some people, but I really don't see the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds on top of the heap. I see the royals on top of the heap. I've had to rethink my opinion on all this, and in the U.S., it's primarily wealthy Episcopalians, with other groups like Jews being scapegoated as the leaders, like George Soros, when it's the Episcopalians. And in the 1770s, the Revolutionary War was going on, and the Church of England over here was getting a lot of heat for being a crown institution. They changed their name to Episcopal Church. So as the generations passed, well, coming down to the present day and on into the last century and all, they send their kids to Episcopal schools, private Episcopal schools, where they probably get lessons stealing corn from blind chickens. And then by the time they're ready to get into the financial system and posts and all the bullion banks and so forth, they snicker watching their financial victims ride a razor blade into a pool of smoking acid. Now, just about all USA presidents are descendants of King John I of England, and he's the one that presided over the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. Now, this was only about the nobles gaining some standing relative to the crown and did just nothing for the small people. In fact, there's a group called the Baronial Order of the Magna Carta, run by Pilgrims Society members, descended from the nobles who met the king at Runnymede over 800 years past. And there we are. Just like the movie Braveheart showed the king running an influence network with nobles. So today, still in 2017, we have the Windsors, British royals, running this secret organization called the Pilgrims, with so many of the big rich, especially the longer established rich, in league with these royals. Now, I want to go through, barely a dozen and a half examples, and I'm going to try to be brief on some of them because I know our time is limited. But the first two are going to be members that I've actually mentioned before, but maybe most of your members haven't picked up on that. But the Daily Mail newspaper, September 15, 2012, reported that a descendant of William the Conqueror, His Grace the Duke of Westminster, Major General Gerald Cavendish Grosvenor, also known as Viscount Belgrave, who according to sources literally owns London, was spending $500 million refurbishing one of his string of mansions. His wife, Natalia, descends from Tsar Nicholas I of Russia, whose wealth in modern terms is expressed north of $300 billion. The Duke owns skyscrapers and prime real estate in 70 cities around the world, including the Wells Fargo Tower in Los Angeles, which there's always Pilgrim Society members running Wells Fargo Bank. Okay, the Duke's antecedents and conniving USA Pilgrims members bought Tokyo, Japan real estate just after World War II and made 70,000% gains. This was the Pilgrim Society Inner Circle member who suddenly passed away last August at age 64 and busted hell wide open like Imhotep in the Mummy movie. That's my opinion, of course. His son, the 7th Duke, will seek to outdo his bully accomplishments, including drastic, near bone-breaking rent hikes gouged against tenants in Paris. Grosvenor's family was part of the founding of the Bank of England in 1694, and by 1782, they operated a large merchant vessel shipping opium into China and were paid in silver for their garbage drug. The Duke created the Wheat Chief Group, a giant in agribusiness and hydropower, which proposes to use soldier fly maggots and treated sewage to feed the world's commoners, while his warmongering kind sits on fur-covered chairs and feasts on caviar seasoned with saffron, the world's costliest spice. The Duke's ancestors had over 20 members of Parliament in their ranks. Gerald Grosvenor, his organization deals in leases running up to 999 years. Yes, and is in size to the Trump organization what Texas is to Rhode Island. Forbes says Grosvenor Group owns huge swaths of land across the globe. The Duke was not Jewish. He was a member of the Protestant Anglican Church of England, and he did not secretly take bossing from Jesuits. Natalia Grosvenor had a great-grandfather who had 70 gold and diamond claims in South Africa that eventually merged into Cecil Rhodes' operation. Grosvenor stems from an old French word meaning master hunter. So here's a briefer one. Yeah,
Charles, you're talking about these men deep in power, and let's talk a little bit about the implications of what they're doing now. Obviously you mentioned how they're involved and they're well positioned. Now, what are they doing in these positions that people should be concerned about?
In May 1902, and people can find this online if they want to look for a little bit, a magazine called the Review of Reviews, May 1902, published a little deal about the lives, ambitions of Cecil Rhodes, and they didn't mention the Pilgrims organization, but there was no other group founded at the time that comes close. In fact, the month after this article came out, they founded the Pilgrims of Great Britain in London. So they're talking about this group here, and they're talking about the seizure of the wealth necessary. They use government power to prevent capital formation outside of their influence circles. And they called it a secret society, gradually absorbing the wealth of the world. He talked about forming the Rhodes Scholars, and he says, I am on the lookout for those who will do the governing of the nations in the years that are to come. Well, the Rhodes Scholars is a publicly visible subsidiary of this Pilgrim Society, and of course Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. So as the years pass in this country, you notice that previous it was that the man could support the household. Today it takes, for most people, 2 incomes to support a household, and yet more and more people are forced into serf communities called apartment complexes, and they never get any equity, see. So this group is about absorbing wealth, seizing wealth, lowering people's living standards, and they have all manner of means of doing it.
Wow. Well, Charles, if you wouldn't mind, maybe give an example or two as to what they're doing, and maybe start off with precious metals. Let's get into silver here.
Okay, if you want to touch on some of these other personalities, I'm going to weave silver into the tapestry here. Of course, Gerald Cavendish Grosvenor's ancestors were silver stealers out of China with opium, so we're on silver already. One of the other members I knew about previous to acquiring a number of recent lists, I've spent several $1,000s, okay, with a contact in the Netherlands who's a good researcher, and he goes over to London occasionally, and I have to pay the transit fares because he's not especially prosperous, but he's got into some City of London archives, which is almost a miracle. But anyway, that's how I got updated lists. But one of the other people I've already mentioned was Paul Mellon, Mellon. Now, his father was a Treasury Secretary in the 1920s, and he cheated U.S. silver producers out of $14 million. The details on that are in the Silver Stealers documentary. A biographer named William Hoffman noted of Paul Mellon that he controls thousands of companies. Seemingly a big exaggeration. However, his father was said by a congressional source to have illegally acquired more property than any other person on earth. He was known heavy holder of over 300 corporations, and today the Bank of New York Mellon represents $32 trillion of assets. That's not billion, that's trillion. Wow. Another Mellon has moved into Bitcoin in a big way, probably to engineer price collapses to shear the sheep, as they're always out to prevent capital formation outside of their circles.
Wow.
But
no, that's some serious implications right there to talk about Bitcoin and then to kind of draw the relationships to what we've seen in the precious metals market.
See, Ken, I put out something called Pilgrims Society Takeover of Bitcoin, and you can find it at Google. It got a fair amount of interest, but to be totally honest with you, there's a lot of websites and well-known figures that don't want anything to do with this research because, see, the situation we're facing is it's not a bunch of banks and government entities like Federal Reserve and Treasury that where this is coming from. It's coming from by invitation only membership organizations, and this one is at the top of the heap. They still don't voluntarily release membership lists to non-members. Bilderberg's been doing that for, over 40 years now. And the trilaterals, they started out without, and people say, oh, the skull and bones, they're at the top of the heap. No, they're not. Because, for example, the Harvard University endowment is about $15 billion bigger than Yale. And then people get into skull and bones at age 18 to 21, but people that get the reins of power handed to them are generally over age 50 because their fathers are still holding the reins of power as long as they can hold on. Look at David Rockefeller. He didn't want to die, right? Sure. Well, what if, say, the only people that get into bones are people that attend Yale? But what if somebody goes out west and collects a string of mines and they get a fortune together that's bigger than anybody in skull and bones? So they're not a bonesman because they didn't attend Yale. Mm-hmm. The Pilgrims cover any university you want to talk about. So, and like I say, they're in government positions. Like Baron Lamont of Lerwick was Chancellor of the British Exchequer in the early 90s, and he held a lot of other top-level British government posts. Before entering Parliament, he was with Rothschild & Sons and Rothschild Asset Management. He's still involved with hedge funds, commodity funds, investment trusts, real estate, British-Romanian Chamber of Commerce. He chairs the British-Iranian Chamber of Commerce. I don't know what business they're going to do until after World War III, maybe. He's part of an English-speaking union tour that they're out to promote English as the world language. And he's a treaty negotiator for England, and he is involved in meetings regarding the world's financial and monetary system. But these guys, they have genealogies, some of them going back traceable over 1,000 years to Saxon England before William the Conqueror came and took it over. Some of these people have roots to Roman Britain, and they have royal roots all over Europe, and nothing's changed by way of the controlling pattern since that, like I said, the movie Braveheart was made. And nothing ever changes, and they've just gone more and more underground.
Well, Charles, let's talk a little about where they have gone underground. And you have here, and we talked about it in the pre-interview, the Aztec Club of 1847. So why don't you give the audience a little idea of what this has to do with and where the Pilgrims were involved with this?
Well, we had a war with Mexico that was started because Mexico was unhappy when America annexed Texas, and so a war broke out between America and Mexico. Mexico lost the war, of course, and the war ended in early 1848, and Mexico lost around 900,000 square miles, and when the invading American forces took over Mexico City on October 12, 1847, they founded this Aztec Club of 1847, and for instance, two of the founders were Winfield Scott, a general, and he's a member of the former Whig, W-H-I-G party that favored a central bank. The Biddles, represented in the Pilgrim Society since then, they were involved with the central bank, the first and second USA Bank, especially the second USA Bank. Another one was Schuyler Hamilton, a grandson of Alexander Hamilton in the Aztec Club, and he favored a central bank. The Schuyler and Hamilton lines remain represented in the Pilgrims today. They also had an interlock, the Order of Indian Wars of the United States. They got hold of immense land areas by driving the native tribes onto all kinds of reservations, and immense land areas, often with timber, water, and mineral wealth, were stolen from Native Americans, and the ownership was concentrated in a few hands, and a number of members of its governing body, the Council of Seven, are identified as Pilgrims members. The same thing happened with the railroad industry. These people were all over the railroad industry like crazy. Northern Pacific, Union Pacific, Missouri Pacific, and they got legislation to say, hey, you know, if we want to put in transcontinental railroads, these legislatures, the federal and the state and the territorial governments, they're going to have to agree to give us huge amounts of lands on either side of the right-of-way. And they got it for nothing other than building the railroads. They paid for themselves. And then there was an article out of Washington State. I can't give you the details, but I remember seeing it, something like $560,000 an acre of railroad land acquired for nothing in the 1800s was sold to a city government up there. And they can put out the Forbes and the Fortune 400 list, and they can paint the picture any way that they want to paint it, but it's these old rich that are running the show and not the new rich. Now, an example of new rich that became members, the Firestone family. That's just one example.
Okay, Charles, so you've had the privilege and you've sought out the details to actually see some of the memberships of this Pilgrim Society. So if you would, talk a little bit more about some of these examples and why they're significant.
I think the significance will be obvious as I go over some of their credentials. For instance, Jack F. Bennett, out of the 1990 list, he was Undersecretary of the Treasury 74-75 when William Simon, another member, bombed gold from 200 down to 105. Bennett became Chief Financial Officer and Director of Exxon, Director of Massachusetts Mutual, Dean Witter, et cetera, and he chaired the American Friends of Bilderberg, which was a detail mentioned in his obituary at Legacy, but they didn't mention that he was in the Pilgrims. It had to be kept out of view. They're always there as overseers of these other organizations, but the obituary stated Bennett's work was instrumental to the implementation of the global movement to currency exchange systems based on floating exchange rates. William Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette. And this guy was another big figure out of the government through Nelson Rockefeller. Donald Rumsfeld, he was a major silver price suppressor in the Nixon Cost of Living Council 71-72, which imposed a federal price cap of $1.61 an ounce on domestic mined silver. And the only reason Hecla Mining spoke out was the price suppression was admitted by the government and out in the open. Now, Ken, the thing I'm concerned about the most in the impending developments about silver and gold is the COMEX is going to lose the ability to control the price of these metals. Now, what's going to happen when they lose the ability to do that? We're just suddenly going to enter a biblical 1,000-year millennium and everything's going to be peace and light and we all get our harp and everything's perfect?
Well, I would assume that the price of silver would go up.
All right, but look, there's always the drumbeat of war, And Salinas Price, of course, he gets a lot more coverage than I do. I just do what I can. But he just recently said, hey, there's this huge defense complex in the United States. Yeah, these people are all over the board of directors of Raytheon, Textron, any of these big companies. But anyway, and they depend for their continued income on more wars. So since we don't have a silver defense stockpile, I'm concerned that they're going to say, hey, national emergency, turn in your silver. There's precedent for it. Franklin Roosevelt did it. There's a different reason for it this time. We're about to go to war. North Korea has sunk one of our ships in the Pacific. We don't have a silver stockpile. You got to turn in your silver. We need to have hoarders and speculators holding the country hostage, and we don't need them profiting from the country's misfortune. So we'll pay them a low rate, $2 an ounce, and they won't have to worry about paying capital gains tax. We'll excuse them for that. Now, I know I'm painting a real bleak picture, and it isn't what people want to hear, but here's the problem is, going back into history, the time when small groups of these conspirators had the biggest increases in their fortunes was when they used government power to wreck their competitors, like the crime of 1873. Everybody whose money was silver was wrecked, and people who had their money in gold, their wealth bounded forward by an order of a number of times, and huge tracts of land were lost to these thieves. Same thing happened in the Great Depression, which that was another attack on silver. It wasn't caused by the crash of 29. So here's my plan, Ken, for preventing a silver nationalization from happening. To spread the word that this Pilgrims Society is conspiring to use the government, and yes, Trump, to put out executive orders saying, hey, we've had our ship hit by China or Korea or whatever, and it's sunk, and we got to have silver. And if I can spread enough of that around, I think they'll balk at the idea of going through with that, and they may switch to some other tactic to suck all our wealth away, like make everybody get vaccines. You'll all get sick. You'll go to hospital chains that they own. They'll suck you dry. Now, Trump says he wants to be cautious about vaccines. Well, look, he can do something good with a bad objective, like to reindustrialize the USA for war power so that we can help his British partners to win another war. Oh, we'll keep all the workers healthy. Don't screw them up with vaccines, see? So they always have a plan in reserve. Well, if stealing silver and gold doesn't work, we'll go back to the vaccine plan. So they're always about, see, they crushed Howard Hunt, Howard Hughes. I was thinking about the Hunt brothers. They got rid of the Hunts. I did that on Silver Squelchers number 18,187 words of details on how Pilgrims members crushed the Hunt Arab silver play. And so these people, it just goes on and on. Okay, we're talking about Rumsfeld. His wife was named Joyce Pearson, Pierson, of one of these wealthy old-line Dutch colonial families. And one of her relatives headed Trans World Airlines. And, for example, William Simon, who was the Treasury Secretary, who attacked gold, well, he got on the COMEX governing board in 1980, and he's the one that led the charge on the COMEX as the most influential member to crush the Hunt Arab silver play. Guess who he married? Carol Girard, Girard, not like Lieutenant Girard from The Fugitive, but of the same Pennsylvania family, tracing to Girard of the first U.S. bank, who was Stephen Girard. He was the wealthiest person in America for many years, and he was the domestic power behind the first U.S. bank. And William Simon married a member of this Girard family. And this goes on and on and on. And I'm seeing all kinds of descendants, like we had a guy in the 1950s, Pierpont Morgan Hamilton. Well, he was an offspring of the Pierpont Morgan line and the Alexander Hamilton line, both wanting a central bank, both bitterly against silver. And this stuff just goes on and on and on. Peter Van Ness Phillip, 1995 list with J.P. Morgan Securities, father-in-law of Victoria Stillman Rockefeller. Well, the Stillmans, another prominent billionaire dynasty in the Pilgrims, and prominent in the founding of what is today Citigroup, and this stuff, it just goes on and on and on. Henry Livingston III, his ancestry is just off. It's just off the charts. I mean, Robert Livingston in 1803 added 803,000 square miles to USA territory with the Louisiana Purchase from France. So I know I can just go on and on and on and on and on. These are just a few examples.
Sure. Well, hey, I appreciate that, and it's amazing what the research that you've been able to put out and connect a lot of dots for us. Charles, let's move over on to the Texas Bullion Depository. I know you have some new data on this that you want to share with everyone. What is it that people need to know regarding this?
Ken, I would suggest if people want to look at the problematic aspects of and first of all, I want people to know I'm not against the depository. What I want is to see it be done right, like it ought to be. I don't want, you don't want to see roaches in the cornmeal, so to speak. If people will go to silverstealers.net and look at the top of the start page, they'll see a red text box saying Red Alert on Texas Bullion Depository. Click on that. That'll take you to a 34,826-word PDF on the depository. And in our little interview here, we'll just touch on some of the more obvious problems and in a very cursory way. Well, the first obvious problem is H.R. 483, the depository legislation, says the feds can't come and take the metal. Well, they had a real big party over that, and they're blowing their party favors out of their mouth, you know, like that little gadget that used to come out like a tongue, you know, like for kids. Oh, but for God's sakes, read the legislation. It says they can't take it, but other than by an authority of this state. They said that twice. So Texas still has civil asset forfeiture. Your property can be taken without your being convicted of a criminal felony. So do not deposit your metals in this depository until Texas gets rid of civil asset forfeiture. It didn't help matters that Trump met with Texas police in the White House in February, and he voiced a wish to destroy the career of a Texas lawmaker who wanted to end civil asset forfeiture. This president will not support your right to own anything, much less gold and silver. Now, in 2013, a man named James Leonard was stopped for a traffic violation on what police say is a well-known drug highway in Texas. During the stop, they found a safe in the trunk of the car. They found $201,000 in the safe and a bill of sale for a home in Pennsylvania, which belonged to Lisa Leonard, his mother. Well, police grabbed the money, claiming, without proving it in criminal court, that it was related to a drug sale. Well, now Lisa Leonard is suing, arguing that police violated her due process. So recently, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear her case. Now, ironically, I find this woman claims to be an IRS agent. Well, that may be poetic justice, but it's still a bad principle for everybody else, because civil asset forfeiture is a witch hunt that you're accused by itself. Just being accused means you're guilty. So if you're not in law enforcement, oh, that's a felony right there, blah, blah, blah. So we hear bellowing prattle, only drug dealers carry cash. What's next? Only drug dealers and terrorists use gold and silver? The depository bill makes that prospect dimmer. However, the environment in which this depository is being created is still bad, with civil asset forfeiture on the scene. Horrible evil is done in the name of doing good. But if metals accounts in the Texas depository started being seized by civil asset forfeiture, word would get around and no more accounts would come in from Texas or anywhere else. It does appear, however, that many tax consumers would rather perpetually dine on hog vomit rather than respect private property. Now, we have some legislatures here trying to rescind civil asset forfeiture, and they get accused of trying to help the drug trade. Well, that's nonsense. And we may wonder if they're going to be retaliated. Well, Ken, I moved all my metal over to a place in New Mexico late last summer. Okay, let's just say it's somewhere between the mountain and the desert. Like I told somebody on the coast, he said, somebody asked him, where do you keep your gold and silver? He says, well, somewhere between the ocean and the sea. Okay, it's nobody's business where you keep your metal. Right. So that's the first thing. And another problem, a local Texas paper, the Star-Telegram, September 5, 2015, said Quote, 2015 was the second time Representative Giovanni Capriglione proposed this bill. He found more success when he said the state would hire an outside firm to manage the depository. Bad news. Outside firm inevitably means connected to the money power. It could be any number of so-called outside firms. Brown Brothers Harriman, owned company on Wall Street, the nation's oldest and largest private bank. Bessemer Trust Company, which came out of the Carnegie Steel fortune. Brittany Capital, State Street Corporation, of the Boston Crown Loyalist families from colonial times, et cetera, enabling them to sidestep outrage if Morgan Chase or Goldman Sachs was selected, but the outcome against Texas would be just as bad. Now, the idea that native Texans can't manage the bullion depository is worse than idiotic. It's a sellout. So we don't need an outside firm to manage the depository, and then they arrange for the federal convoy to come to the depository at 2 in the morning, and they carry all the metal out, and it goes to the Federal Reserve Bank, or it goes to the Treasury Department. You know, we don't need any of this going on. Now, the Texas Gold is not actually Texas Gold per se. It's owned by UTIMCO, the University of Texas Investment Management Company, but the UTIMCO board does not personally own that gold. They're supposed to be fiduciaries looking out for the interests of the beneficiaries of that gold, which is the University of Texas system, the employees and the students. So, but the board of UTIMCO is demanding that the Texas Gold remain linked to the COMEX system. So the governor signed the legislation into law over a year and a half ago. So why didn't the state of Texas or UTIMCO tell HSBC New York, hey, return the gold within 30 days, and instead of waiting until the depository is built, and then they could store it in a basement in Austin and have it protected by units of the Texas National Guard. See, by waiting now, it's going to get to be 2 years, and the gold still hasn't been called back. Is the UTIMCO gold still there? Has it gone to Germany? Has it gone to fulfill COMEX depository obligations? Is it somewhere out there in a triple rehypothecated daisy chain, see? So some of these board members include former Navy Admiral William McRaven. He's a UTIMCO director. He's also insinuated himself to be chancellor of the University of Texas system with 231,000 students and employees. Now, McRaven is also a director of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a direct subsidiary of the Pilgrims created in 1921. So I think McRaven, if I had an up-to-date list, he would be in the Pilgrims roster. So McRaven won Navy awards for rifle and pistol marksmanship, but he opposes campus carry for UTA students, which was approved by the legislature and signed by the governor. So this guy's at defiance with the will of the elected representatives. He's at defiance against the people. And we may recall in 1966 that a sniper named Charles Whitman, who was on psychiatric medications, that was 68. But people didn't have a way to shoot back, see, except a few police that got there after the fact. And, you know, in 1961, John Wayne said in a movie, Texas needs every man and every gun, but what we need to be rid of is flakes like McRaven. Now, Phil Adams is another UTIMCO director. He's a member of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Chair of the TPP is crook name of Wendy Graham, who headed the CFTC from 88 to 93, and then she became an Enron board member. So the UTIMCO directors are running with crooks. There's another one named Lee Hobson out of Dallas. He is a CFR member, which in the end, the effect of that is the same as if he's in the Pilgrims. He might be on the waiting list for membership. Hobson is an Episcopalian, which Church of England. Now, let me see. Hobson started with Goldman Sachs. And see, so he's against the UTIMCO gold coming back to Texas. And then there's this guy named Edwin Truman, a fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, named after Pilgrims Society member, billionaire Peter G. Peterson, former Commerce Secretary. He's an understudy of David Rockefeller, who became a member of the Pilgrims in 1949. Yeah. So anyway, Edwin Truman says, oh, don't move the Texas gold back to Texas. That's just crazy. Now, another trustee of the Peterson Institute, is Lynn Forrester de Rothschild. Now, the Rothschilds, behind the scenes, through Cecil Rhodes, were one of the founders of the Pilgrims. So the Texas Gold is in HSBC, New York, and another Peterson Institute manager is Douglas Flint, who heads the HSBC group in London. Yeah, he's probably a Pilgrims member, but you know, this group will not make membership rosters voluntarily available. They say all we want to do is promote friendly relations between America and the Commonwealth, the United Kingdom. Well, look, Ken, if that's all they want to do, why do they have to keep their identity secret to do that? So, yeah, so Paul Volcker, yeah, he's the one that broke the hunts out of 60 million ounces of silver by 1986. He's a Peterson Institute trustee, and the Peterson Institute says, don't bring the gold back to Texas. And the names of David Rockefeller and former Treasury Secretary George Shultz are also on the Peterson Institute. All Pilgrims members, and we need to get coverage for this organization so we can put pressure on them to start putting out lists. And if they start putting out lists, we're going to see George Soros, we're going to see Bill Gates, we're going to see Warren Buffett, we're going to see people like this as members. And currently, I've been able to get up to 2002, and it's a stone wall, but that's a 22-year improvement.
Well, you're out there on the front lines really digging through information that is not widely known and not widely understood at that matter. Charles, I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you would, to share any last bits of information that we have yet to get to yet, whether it's about the Pilgrims, the Texas Bullion Depository. Is there anything else that you want to leave our audience with before we close out this interview?
Okay, I'll try to capsulize this and condense what I wanted to, some thoughts I wanted to convey. Delaware Depository, a member of the COMEX, they've also said that if Texas brings the Atimco gold back to Texas, Texas should carefully consider the consequences of moving the gold back to Texas. What are the consequences of that? We're all going to wake up with a bunch of rattlesnakes in our bed in the morning? We've already got the snakes in the bed. We need to get them out of there. It's the people that say, don't bring the gold back here. So Delaware Depository, of course, is located naturally in Delaware. And the DuPont family, yeah, they're Pilgrim Society represented. They're also longtime Silver Users Association members. But guess what? Delaware is actually named for the Earls of Delaware, W-A-R-R, an obscure English dynasty that's part of this thing. And then, let me see. Oh, yeah. People are offering to store the Texas gold, saying that, you know, Texas is just incompetent. We're just a bunch of retard mongoloids. We don't know which way's up. One of these companies is Malka Amit, which they ship gold and diamonds around and all that. Well, Malka Amit, Switzerland, took a pink diamond into storage some years ago from a South African dealer, and then the South African dealer notified him he wanted to take the diamond out, and they says, oh, so-and-so signed it out, and you agreed to let him have it. He says, the hell I did. So this is in the Swiss courts right now. And no, so Malka Amit, being chiselers, they're saying the diamond isn't worth $50 million like the dealer says. It's only worth $5 million. So this is one of the companies that wants to store the Texas gold. Another one is Dillon Gage, based in Dallas. Now, I get Dillon Gage silver through a local dealer, and the silver's perfect. It's good silver. But Dillon Gage is saying CME membership would give the Texas Depository a certain reputational weight. Well, I don't know. To me, that's kind of like, you know, Charles Manson being on the Choir Boys is giving it a reputational weight. Brinks offered to store and handle the Texas gold. Well, the chairman of Brinks is a trustee of Colgate University, and that goes back to a financier named Colgate Hoyt of 55 Wall Street, who married General Sherman's niece, the same General Sherman who destroyed Georgia. And his brother, John Sherman, was Treasury Secretary, a big part of the Coinage Act of 1873, which pauperized several million people, and they lost their land because silver was demonetized. And all this gets back to Brinks today. And, oh, yeah, which one of these was it? Was it Brinks? Yeah, I think it was Brinks that sometime last fall, they had $1.5 million worth of gold stolen out of the back of one of their security vans on a sidewalk in New York City. Maybe you heard about that. Well, you know what? We need the Texas government to do a number of things. We need to nix this outside firm managing the depository. They need to get rid of civil asset forfeiture, respect all private property rights. President Madison said, where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. There's too much temptation to greed, see? So they also ought to put out a bunch of resolutions that there's no pressure on Texas residents or businesses to come into the depository. If people want to exchange gold and silver or platinum group metals from one hand to another in exchange for goods and services, they can do that. And the state must warn the Postal Service and other shipping companies to not interfere with commerce relating to shipments of precious metals or diamonds if they come under pressure from the D.C. government to do that. If the mega banks force a bail-in on the part of their depositors, like, well, you can't get your money, but here's shares. Oh, and by the way, they're non-voting shares, and it's collared stock at a low price, blah, blah, blah. If they do that, the Texas government, state of Texas, should seize all the buildings owned by the mega banks in Texas and all their holdings in Texas. And, there's an SMU professor, Cal Gilson, who is an ex-CFR member, and he said, well, the Texas gold is just as well off in New York. Well, guess what? Gilson is a former director of the Tower Institute at SMU, named for a long-term senator from Texas, John Tower, and he voted yes to the Coinage Act of 1965, getting silver coins out of our money. Now, on February 23, 1982, the Pilgrims Society London hosted John Tower. I can prove that if anybody wants to get me to prove it. They can just use the contact form at Silver Stealers. I'll send you all the proof you want.
Well, I'd love to see it, and I'd love to, I have your contact information, obviously. Charles, again, is there anything else that you wanted to leave our audience with? I don't want to cut you short, and you're giving us an amazing amount of information. And is there anything else that you feel that would be important for our audience to know regarding the Pilgrims and the Texas Bullion Depository?
I'll try to be as brief as I can. That's a tall order. But the Pilgrims organization on both sides of the Atlantic, it functions as a type of senate for the big rich. In other words, you can have a family. The best example I can think of is the Guggenheim family, who've never been paternally represented in this group, so far as I know, but they've had maternal representation. So these wealthy families, and let's list a few that people may not have heard about, the Iselins, I-S-E-L-I-N. They're an old Swiss family. And the Gallatins that were part of the attack on silver in the 1820s. There's a Gallatin County, Montana, named after them. Mount Rushmore in South Dakota is named after a member. One of these families owns the Meteor Crater in Arizona. That's the Behringer family. But the Pilgrims is, there might be, say, 178 members of one of these dynastic families, and they have proxies in the Pilgrims representing their interests and voting their shares for them. And they send people into the national government. If you look on the start page of Silver Stealers, you'll find I've got a lot of information about the presidential elections, and I've got something in there going back to 1916, showing, actually 1892, showing that these people were presidential electors, and they were determining who the candidates were going to be. And President McKinley, when he was assassinated, guess where he was taken? He was taken to the home of one of these members. And, yeah, you're wanting to know who the name of the member was. Dear me, well, if I had a moment to think, John C. Milburn, M-I-L-B-U-R-N. You can look that up. That's where he died, at his house. But anyway, Texas has to put out some resolutions that, in other words, before a national emergency is declared, like saying, well, we've got to have gold for the monetary system, and we got to have silver for the military. Texas and all the other states that are wanting to create bullion depositories, this is a good movement, but like I say, it has to be done right. Get the Cobras and Copperheads out of the picture, because they're trying to get in, and they're already there. The states need to send resolutions to D.C. through their senators. Hey, you cannot declare a national emergency and steal gold and steal silver from the public for wartime or monetary or whatever. Because look, Ken, if that happens before these depositories are up and running, there may not be that much gold and silver to put into the depositories. And these Pilgrims Society members, let me tell you what, they're long-range planners, and they're able to plan for centuries. And I know we need to close. Let me just give you one more example. The British have been attacking silver since 1572, when Sir Francis Drake seized the first shipment of Spanish silver on the ocean. Of course, Spain was a competing empire, and the Catholics were behind Spain, of course, the Pope and all that. But by this time, the English had the Church of England. There is no secret Vatican control over England. That's a hoax probably put out by the British. But anyway, the British have held the whip hand in world affairs, especially since the Spanish Armada fell to England in 1588. But I mentioned Sir Francis Drake. Well, almost 400 years after he stole the first shipment of silver from Spain, a member of this same Drake family, Sir Eric Drake, appeared at the helm of the world's fifth largest industrial, British Petroleum, and a member of the Pilgrims of Great Britain.
Wow. Well, Charles, you've certainly showered us with nuggets of wisdom today, and a lot of stuff that I think, people should definitely look into and see for themselves if this is lining up. Obviously, they can go to your website, silverstealers.net. And again, sir, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and educate us. If you want to let everyone know a little bit more about your website, please do.
Okay, Ken. Well, I had the awful face of Barack Obama on my start page for the longest, since January of 2011, because I felt, I've got to have the current president there because he's the one that can issue an executive order. Well, so now we have a new president. I had to put in Trump. Well, you can click some links there and find him consorting with Paul Volcker in 1993. Okay? Now, let me mention real quickly one other group that this Pilgrim Society is involved with, and that's the Order of the Merovingian Dynasty. It was a dynasty that ruled France from the mid-400s, 400 years on, for around another 150 years, and not coincidentally, from the time that they took over France, that was the time when in AD 451 there was a huge turning point in European history. That was when a Roman coalition under Flavius Aetius barely won a victory over the hordes of Attila the Hun. Over 140,000 battle casualties ensued in a conflict lasting over 3 days. The defeat of the Huns caused a shift in world power. Now, this Order of the Merovingian Dynasty, formally as a group, traces only to 2004, but its members and ancestors have been active for literally 1,500 years. Charles Neuhauser, a big investment figure,